You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WYBC.
CYTV
Here on the Daily Signal.
Good evening. Welcome to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated first on 93 WYBC. Whether you're joining across our radio or TV syndication network, or you're tuning in via the live stream on YouTube or X, my personal favorite places to watch, it's a blast to have you here because there are a couple of major wins for the Trump economy that came down in the last 2 days. And I'm not trying to joke. I'm not trying to do a rug pull here. There really are a couple of optimistic indicators that, though the media narrative is trying to claim that like we're on death's door regarding international tariff and trade war stuff, things are actually looking pretty decent. But we'll get to that in due time, and we've got the best guy out there to do that with. First, we're going to talk a little bit about immigration customs enforcement. So the left has not only lost it because Tom Homan's Immigration Customs Enforcement, ICE agency, is upholding federal law and going after illegal immigrants who have committed violent crimes, but also after the direct order from Secretary of State Rubio, federal law regarding immigrants who are here that are not citizens, but are here on a green card or visa of some sort that openly incite violence through terrorism. You know, you're distributing flyers for foreign terror organizations. That, no, you're not allowed to do that here in the United States. And so ICE also took into custody Mahmoud Khalil of Columbia University, and that has led to an interesting series of protests in New York today, which included Tom Homan looking on in a fun smirk as Assemblyman Zoran Mamdani was yelling and screaming in his face as though he was at a restaurant, and after a long day of being a soccer mom, the soup came to the table cold. Check it out.
How many more New Yorkers? How many more New Yorkers will you detain? How many more New Yorkers without trial? Do you believe in the First Amendment? Do you believe in the First Amendment, Tom Homan?
When we asked Tom Homan, all he had to answer for that cruelty was a smirk.
LOL. Imagine saying that and thinking that makes Tom Homan look bad. I do love that the yell, how many more New Yorkers are you going to intern? Well, are those particular New Yorkers citizens of the United States of America? Because, you know, if they're citizens of the United States, well then no. But if they are here illegally, or if they are here and then violating the United States law, illegal immigrants and individuals here on green cards, they don't enjoy the same First Amendment rights that you and I enjoy. The rights of the Bill of Rights are meant for citizens of the United States. It's like basic fourth grade civics. Not really sure where this nonsense is going. Tom Homan's reaction, by the way, is fantastic. Here's Tom Homan just walking by all of the people yelling, man's just eating an apple. Fantastic.
No hate, no fear. Immigrants are welcome here. No hate, no fear. Immigrants are welcome.
Tom Homan is undeterred. The man does not care one wooden nickel's worth when it comes to the bleeding and the crying from those who defend illegal immigrants, especially violent ones. It doesn't matter if you're a random protester or if you're the governor of the state of New York, Kathy Hochul. Here is Tom Homan going after Kathy Hochul, and rightly so, today.
Now let's talk about the green light law. Let's talk about your governor. Your governor who's staying on national TV after NYPD were assaulted by illegal alien gang members. You had a woman burned alive by illegal alien subway. Your governor stands on national TV. Well, I think criminal aliens should be deported. What's one of the first things she do? She goes down to New York City and tries to fire the mayor who wants to help me find public safety threats. Let me give a shout at Mayor Adams. Like him or love him, I called him up for 2 years by not doing enough. As a career cop, he wasn't doing enough. But when I sat down with him back in November, he came to the table. He wanted to help on significant public safety threats. He don't want to be an immigration officer. I don't want to be an immigration officer. But the mere fact he wants to get us into Rikers Island, where people are locked up because they committed a crime, he wanted to get federal immigration authorities back into Rikers Island to talk to illegal aliens who committed a crime against a citizen.
So what you're seeing here is basically a take by the Trump administration in general to land on the 80-20 issues. We're going to talk about that later in the show as well. Americans, 80% of Americans, this is what an 80-20 issue means. The vast majority of Americans are against illegal immigrants, violent illegal immigrants. Not just the pregnant mom who made it over the border. We're talking individuals who are guilty of homicide, who have been charged with sex crimes, who are trafficking humans and drugs, who are guilty of large-scale theft. Those individuals, Americans do not want on the streets. Doesn't matter what color they are, doesn't matter where they come from. Americans are not here for that. And so the Trump administration is very wisely putting itself in a position on this, as well as other 80-20 issues. One of those things, and again, we're going to talk about this later, is also the trans issue. The Democrats have made it their life's work to go all in on trans activism, claiming that there's going to be mass roundups and homicides in the streets. And so what has that incited? I'll make that argument. Individuals who are already mentally unwell, individuals who are already suffering from a mental illness of transgenderism. Here is a street preacher today who had a gun pointed right at him in his face because he had the gall to suggest that there are men and there are women, and you can't change that.
Harder, but you need to try less being like somebody you're not and start to humble yourself and be somebody that God made you to be. He didn't make a man to be a woman. He made the man to be a man.
Street preachers
He didn't
just
make
preaching?
the woman to be a man. He made the woman to be a woman. And this is the truth. What are you going to do? Come attack me now?
Pulls out a gun.
Hey, man, that's up to you. If you want to pull that on me, well, God bless you. So you just threatened me with a gun. You just pulled a gun on my face.
That is, in fact, how many of the left are reacting. In the more astute academic side of the left, and I'm not talking about Columbia University professors, federal judges are just inventing brand new reasons and ways to try stopping the Trump administration from carrying out their constitutional and congressionally provided authority. So, to be clear, if the United States does not want Donald Trump, through the executive office, to be able to hire and fire individuals to federal agencies, if they don't want the president to be able to order the federal agencies in what they do, then maybe Congress should limit the size and scope of federal agencies. But I never heard any of that during the Biden administration, so let's talk about some of the recent federal judge pearl clutching in this case. Today, a federal judge in D.C. ordered the release of 2 Venezuelan illegal immigrants who were arrested by Immigration Customs Enforcement for illegally crossing the southern border. Federal judges have no authority in the United States to order Immigration Customs Enforcement to release a non-citizen. That is not something that a federal judge has the constitutional authority to do. That's not it. They can deem certain actions in accordance with the Constitution or not if it has already fallen under their purview as a district judge. But you have these federal district court judges that waltz in and declare some type of magical supranational injunction and think that that automatically, because they're a federal judge, therefore they have the right to step anything at all cold in its tracks. That is not how it works. And the way this is going to end is a Supreme Court case that will very, very overtly limit the size and scope of injunctions, freezes, thaws, whatever, that federal district court judges are allowed to do. Another federal judge today attempted to block President Trump from saying who would and would not be allowed into federal buildings, and this is a very vague injunction, would not be allowed in private areas to view private documents, like a security clearance light situation, of the employees of Perkins Coie, the law firm which helped develop the Russia hoax. So it doesn't even make sense for a federal judge to have anything to do with whether or not employees who are under suspicion of the obstruction of justice saying, well, you still have to let them into the back rooms of federal buildings. Why? How is that your authority? I mean, I understand if, they're barred from the post office and you say, look, these guys still get to go in and hit up the post office, but that's not what's going on here. Radio folks will let you head over to commercial. We'll be back in a second. I'll stay on with the live stream. We'll talk a little bit more about another judge. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal. Last but not least, on March 6th, U.S. District Court Judge Beryl Howell held that Gwen Wilcox, a former member of the National Labor Relations Board, the NLRB, was illegally fired from her job. So Judge Howell made the weirdo suggestion that because firing this individual in the NLRB would have left the NLRB with not enough board members, like they have to have statutory quorum, that means she can't be fired. That's not how that works. There is no constitutional mechanism which suggests that federal judges can determine whether or not a federal agency in the executive branch is at operational capacity. Federal judges can't even rule on on congressional hearings. They can't rule like, oh, you need this many members, and if this person, keeps saying there's not quorum, they're going to have to hold this. There's no provision in the U.S. Constitution to do those kinds of things. But they're just trying to throw out whatever they can to suggest, oh, well, Trump is some ultimate evil. If you don't want Trump to have the power, this isn't solved at the judiciary. It is solved at the congressional level. Who gave the executive agencies the amount of power that they have? Let's flip over to the international for just a second here. These are rumors at the moment. This is according to Bloomberg sources, so this absolutely could change. Russia's president for life, Putin, is likely to agree to ceasefire terms with Ukraine, but wants to include his own conditions. This is the part that's according to Bloomberg sources. One of those conditions could be a demand that the United States and Europe halt weapons supplies to Ukraine in general, as in after the peace is made. We are in negotiation territory now. Marco Rubio has set the stage. And so what you're going to see over the next couple of weeks, at least I believe, is despite all the conversations about, oh, Ukraine sent drones to Moscow, oh, the Russians are dropping attack, until the ceasefire stops. It makes every bit of sense on planet Earth for both sides to go in as hard as they can. Diplomacy and war are not like talking to each other. The War Department of a government and then the diplomatic services of the executive office are not like calling each other up and chatting. The Army and the Navy don't even like communicating. You think that the diplomatic service of Ukraine is like chatting it up with the frontline units, telling them how hard to go, and the same thing over on the Kremlin? These are the last opportunity that either of these countries are likely going to have to get as much as they can. Then once the ceasefire begins, you can't gain any additional leverage. But the idea that Putin is trying to, get to the ceasefire, but Zelensky is launching drones and, oh, it's so terrible. That's silly. That's not how any of this works. You don't start broadcasting your intentions in a ceasefire before the ceasefire. No matter how many times we talk about this, it astounds me how many people don't quite grasp that you do not do diplomacy, you do not do negotiations in front of the general public, because you know who's watching the general public? The opposition. You keep as many cards as close to the chest as possible. That's how it goes. So, international stuff shunted off to the side. Up next, we're going to be bringing in E.J. Antoni for a conversation about the latest consumer price index numbers, as well as a couple of very interesting price drops. The economic data really is unreal for the Trump administration. We're going to hit it. It's the Tony Kinnett cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated first on 93 WIBC. Don't go anywhere. We'll be just right back.
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Back to the Economic Thunderdome. I'm Tony Kinnett here on the Tony Kinnett Cast with E.J. Antoni, the economist over from the Heritage Foundation who pulls no punches. He is like Mike Tyson without the lisp. He's like George Foreman without the expensive fat-burning grills that he sold for a long time. The man came ready to talk about some new numbers. And boy, EJ, do we have some new numbers to talk about? What do you think?
Oh, absolutely right. And almost all good news. This is a really welcome change compared to what we've been seeing over and over again, not just the last few months, but frankly, the last few years. If you want to start off with the inflation numbers here, the latest report that we got today. So this was the month of February, the first full month of the Trump administration. And thank goodness we had a notable slowdown in the inflation rate. People forget that during the last really 7 months of the Biden administration, we had inflation, not just it was still a problem, but it was reaccelerating, meaning it was getting worse month after month.
Right.
And now we saw a big drop. The monthly increase in prices was actually cut in half. Now, obviously, that's not to say prices themselves got cut in half, right? But the rate of increase slowed. And I understand that gets confusing for a lot of people. So maybe think of it this way. Imagine you're driving down the highway and you're going 60 miles an hour, and all of a sudden you slow down to 30. Right now, if you look on the side of the road, the mile marker keeps going up. That's essentially the price level. However, your speed, your rate of increase, that's inflation. And so the goal of the Trump administration is not only to slow this sucker all the way down to 0 miles an hour, but then to get it into reverse so you see those mile markers on the side of the road start coming down. Obviously, we've got a long way to go there, but things like cutting regulatory red tape, cutting taxes is going to be a huge, huge help, along with boosting energy production. All of those things are going to help put downward pressure on prices and grow the economy.
Let's talk about that for a second. We'll put Trump and kind of the macro international economic policies on the back burner for just a minute. If we're going to get into the basics of turning the inflation meter, or at least the cost of goods, down, then you got to increase supply, right? Basic supply and demand economics. How is the Trump administration increasing the supply? I know you mentioned energy production, but energy is not the only expensive thing out there.
Oh, sure. Probably the most expensive thing lately is eggs. I keep seeing all these memes where it's stupid things like a guy down on one knee, like he's proposing, and as he opens up the what's supposed to be the engagement ring case, instead there's just an egg inside.
I'll never forget the classic Danny DeVito.
Can I offer you a nice egg in this trying time?
So there you go. So, I mean, it was basically the result of what the Biden administration did towards the end there with the bird flu, where they put these insane policies in place that provided a financial incentive for egg farmers to literally cull their flocks instead of bringing eggs to market. And what's really tragic here, Tony, is the fact that this included farmers who had already had bird flu come through their flock. So their egg-laying hens had already survived the bird flu, were now immune, whatever happened to trust the science, right? And so they could keep laying eggs without worry of future infection. And instead, they were paid to kill those birds. So after culling literally over 100 million egg-laying hens, it should be no surprise it created an egg shortage. And fortunately, the Trump administration has been dealing with this pretty darn well, not only with not repeating those mistakes of those bad policies, but putting new policies in place that will encourage the production of additional eggs by increasing the supply of those egg-laying hens. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now. So as more and more supply comes online, you're going to see prices come down. And interestingly, that really is a perfect parallel to what they're trying to do with energy. This is Econ 101. You increase supply, you bring down price. And so the goal here is to push up the supply of oil, of natural gas, particularly produced here in the U.S., and all of that's going to put downward pressure on prices. But probably
on every price, right? Because the transport of the goods from the producer to the seller takes a bit of a toll when you're looking at the energy costs on whatever it takes to transport, whether it's by plane, boat, truck, whatever.
Bingo. So all products, all services, everything you buy, energy is one of the inputs there, without exception. So if you can bring down the price of energy, you will bring down the price of everything because it's so ubiquitous of an input throughout the economy. But it actually is even more important than that, Tony, because when we look at something like natural gas, for example, people don't realize most of our chemical blend stocks don't come from oil anymore. With the hydraulic fracturing revolution and horizontal drilling and other technologies technologies. Natural gas has become so much cheaper to bring to market, especially here in the U.S. compared to the rest of the world, that we get most of our chemical blend stocks now from natural gas. So even if you go and you buy something like synthetic engine oil for your car, chances are that was synthesized in a lab, not from a barrel of oil, but from natural gas, if you can believe it. The same thing with synthetic fertilizer. We create that from natural gas. And so if you can bring down the price of natural gas, you're going to bring down the price of fertilizer, which is the biggest input cost in a lot of foods. You're going to bring down the price of everything from the plastics that are in this microphone and the plastics that are in the dashboard in your car, in your cell phone, right? It reduces the cost of polyester fiber that goes into clothing. I mean, you name it. Anywhere and everywhere, you can look around and see something that was made, believe it or not, from natural gas. So again, increase the supply of that, you'll bring down the price. You bring down the price for all these other things too.
And just to clarify, the average price of natural gas sitting at $9.30 in 2022, and then bringing this over, and I'm talking about futures specifically, to $4.40. Right at the end of last year, it was a touch lower. Gas is actually trending downward from, I believe, $3.95 on average in 2022. Now it's down to $3.08 a gallon. And then just because we were talking about eggs are now down from their high of $8.21 to $5.17 and dropping rapidly. So that's, those are the particular goods that are, I don't want to say easier to produce in the United States, but they have a faster turnaround. There are a lot of other things that Trump wants produced here at home that may not be easier to just set up a factory and presto, all of the goods are being made here in the U.S. And that's where the tariff situation comes in. So can you tell us a little bit about tariffs at the present time and how Trump is using them? He's talking about kind of a longer term tariff policy, and what can we expect? As much as you can tell us anyway.
Sure. So the tariff question has a lot of moving parts here. What essentially Trump is doing is he's using the same tool for a host of different problems. So, again, very, very complicated, a lot of things in the mix, but here are some of the big ones. One is the fact that tariffs are a way to essentially shift the tax burden off of the American people and onto the rest of the world. When you put a tariff in place, it's not simply just the producer or just the consumer that has to pay that tax. And so you end up seeing the tax split. The proportions can vary, but you see the tax split between both one country and the other. So as other countries have put tons of tariffs on us, we have been paying some of those countries' taxes for them. Trump is essentially trying to do the exact same thing. We forget, Tony, that for a lot of this nation's history, we didn't have an income tax. That's a relatively new invention. The Supreme Court had actually ruled it unconstitutional. They had to change the Constitution in 1913 to have a personal income tax. Right. So what did we do before then? We just had tariffs. The government funded itself essentially entirely by tariffs during the time that Trump keeps referring to as the original golden age, which was that period after the Civil War, basically until 1913. That was a time when, again, the government funded itself essentially entirely through tariffs, not through an income tax. It didn't even exist.
But the issue that I have is seeing a lot of taxes that are already in place. We already have the income tax that's in place. We have property taxes. We have taxes on inheritance. We have every kind of tax from here to there and everywhere that you could imagine. And the idea that now with an increased price on goods that are imported to the United States and retaliatory tariffs and this intermittent trade war that we have going on with the EU and with Canada, is that going to break consumers before the midterm so that then the Democrats in complete disarray and chaos are actually able to get it together long enough to take back the House and the Senate?
Well, this is why we can't talk about the whole tariff strategy in a vacuum, right? We have to consider all the other dynamic effects that are at play. Right. And we'll see this as we start talking about some of the other reasons why Trump is using tariffs. But in terms of using it for tax revenue, what you can do is use the increased revenue from tariffs to decrease the revenue that you need from something like the personal income tax or the corporate income tax or some of the other taxes you mentioned, like death taxes, inheritance taxes, and the like.
Take those particular taxes away. So the question that I have is the president, and I know this doesn't exist in a vacuum, And a lot of our viewers and listeners know rather well, because of the Trump cycle that I made, that Trump does use tariffs as economic and political leverage, probably better than any president in decades upon decades. But the question that I have is, does the president have the ability through his office to lower the how does this look in practice? Do we start seeing the money flowing in some kind of report saying, wow, look at all of this money the United States federal government is getting now through tariffs. Now we can lower the income tax rate. What does this look like in practice? And does Trump have the ability to pull that lever? Does Lutnick, or is that a congressional bill?
Well, in terms of implementing the tariffs right now, there are various essentially emergency provisions that Trump has access to, and by those he can implement these tariffs. And you mentioned Lutnick, so the Commerce Department contains the Bureau of Economic Analysis. They can track the money coming in and essentially say, look at this revenue that we've raised. We can use this now to offset reductions in personal income taxes. And the reason, Tony, why that's such a great swap to make is because let's say you cut $100 billion off of income taxes and you replace it with $100 billion in tariff revenue. You may think, well, that's just one for one. Why does it matter? I'm going to keep more of my income, but I'm going to spend more of it on imported goods. No, the exporter from another country that is giving you those imported goods, they are not passing the full freight of that tariff along to you. That's not what happens. Both economic history and economic theory says that that's not going to be the case. So who pays the rest of the tariff? The rest of that tax burden, if you will, that tax incidence, as we like to call it, is falling on the foreign company. And so you have now helped shift some of the tax base overseas. And the reason why that's not just important, but frankly, really fair, is the fact that it is our Navy that's patrolling the world sea lanes and making international trade possible.
We'll be back with more on E.J. Antoni and the American economy in just a second. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Back on the Tony Kinnett Cast with E.J. Antoni, economist from the Heritage Foundation. One of the best parts of Thomas Jefferson's foreign policy was don't touch our boats, and we'll keep the trade lanes open as a nice little byproduct. But when I meant the economic levers, I didn't mean who gets to pull the tariff lever. What I meant was who makes the decision and when to lower the income tax rate, and is it going to be enough, at least as far as the average American voter is concerned, to make them go, hey, you know, these tariffs aren't so bad after all? Because that's kind of what in my mind is the issue. Is this going to be by tax time, maybe not this year, but next year? And is it Congress that makes the choice to bring down the tax rate? How does that go?
Well, reducing those statutory marginal tax rates would definitely require congressional action. You know, in terms of the magnitude here, though, a lot of that, frankly, is up to what foreign leaders do. And this, I guess, is a segue into another reason why Trump is going down this tariff fight. Essentially because he wants reciprocity, right? This is kind of the economic corollary to the golden rule. What he's basically saying is to these other countries or these other conglomerates like the EU, he's saying, look, the way you treat our exporters and our workers is how we are going to treat yours. So if you're going to put in place a 10% tariff on autos, then we'll do the same thing. If you're going to put this tariff on our electronics, on sugar, corn syrup, whatever the case may be, we're going to do that for your industries as well, and so on. I mean, you can go down the line, Tony. It's absolutely staggering when you see a nation like Japan has a 25% tariff on American beef, but we only have a 2% tariff on their beef. Why is it that Canada can get away with something like a 270% tariff on American dairy products? And that's okay? That's somehow fair? That, again, they are penalizing American workers and American industry in order to protect their own markets, except they want free access to our markets. I'm sorry, but that's not a fair deal. And so the president is essentially saying, look, if you're going to do X, Y, and Z, we are going to do that to you. And so that automatically creates a tremendous amount of uncertainty because suddenly, Tony, it's not all up to us. Now we have to respond to what these other nations are doing. And that means that we have to wait until they act first.
So what does all this mean then for the stock market? There's lots of uncertainty, there's the falling and just the roller coastering, because Americans factor in stock market performance along with the price of goods and energy into how well the economy is doing. So what does this mean for kind of a two-part question for the stock market and then for Americans' perception of the economy long-term, not just right in the immediate?
Great questions, Tony. Let's take that second one first in terms of how do people perceive the economy through the lens of the stock market. I think it's important to remember when we look back at the last several years, there's been a huge disconnect between Wall Street and Main Street. People have watched as all of the major indices just hit record high after record high. And meanwhile, they're looking at what they can buy with their weekly paycheck, and it's getting smaller and smaller year after year. So I think there's actually a pretty good disconnect at this point where Americans increasingly don't pay as much attention as they used to the stock market. Now, to that first question you had, though, it's important to realize when we look at the population of Wall Street, the money managers, the traders, the brokers, et cetera, the analysts, what we find is that the average age is pretty much where it has been for a long time. But that means that most of those folks weren't even alive long enough to see, at least in their working careers, to see the last real bear market. So anytime they have seen a downturn in the market, it's been temporary. There's been a short emergency. The government jumped in to bail somebody out, and that was the end of it. And then we were right back onto the races. So they don't know how to navigate things like a bear market. They also don't know how to navigate things like a president who's willing to use tariffs to accomplish different goals that he has, whether that's securing the border and preventing fentanyl from coming in, or whether it's trying to get, like we were talking about earlier, a level playing field for American producers, or maybe it's trying to get Canada to stop allowing China to abuse the country of origin provisions in the USMCA, whatever the case may be.
But
right?
just to jump in real quick,
this world.
We do understand that's probably, and when I say probably, I mean just because it hasn't been explicitly stated by the administration, that's the real issue with Canada. I've seen people say, oh, we have no idea why Donald Trump is treating Canada this way. You have Noam say it's all about the fentanyl. You'll have another official say it's about bad reciprocity. I'm telling you, because China has such an iron grip on foreign influence in Canada and has now for 17, 18 years, at least in this particular way, that's the real issue here. It's Panama all over again.
Yeah, I strongly encourage all your listeners and watchers to investigate just how much real estate in Ontario, for example, China and its affiliates own. I mean, it is absolutely astonishing. You're exactly right, Tony. The influence that the Chinese Communist Party has over a nation that's supposedly our friend, like Canada. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, getting back to Wall Street real quick, it essentially means that all of these folks were raised on this steady diet of free trade, always and everywhere. Under no circumstance can you ever use tariffs for anything, for economic or non-economic reasons. Doesn't matter. Even if other countries are abusing you economically with tariff and non-tariff barriers, you still shouldn't use them. That's just what we have all been taught over and over again. And President Trump is challenging that orthodoxy, as he challenges many orthodoxies, right? This is the same guy who was like, why are we in NATO anymore? Now, obviously, there's a good case to be made for staying in NATO. I'm not saying we need to leave NATO. Some people are. I'm not making that argument. I'm simply just saying, as Victor Davis Hansen has said, he's questioning all of these things. Right. And it's good that he's questioning the status quo on tariffs.
The status quo that we just assume, this is the way that it's been forever. Therefore, stability and constance equal success and the best way to move forward. And that's not always true. And obviously, hindsight is 2020. We can talk about whether using the sledgehammer, the scalpel, or something in between is the best way to move about it, but we'll save that for the Monday morning quarterbacks. EJ Antoni from the Heritage Foundation, the guy who you call in when you need just the tough talk on economics that isn't trying to sell you a bunch of sugar. Thanks very much for joining us, dude.
Thank you for having me, Tony.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the other federal actions, right? Because there really are far more things going on than just the tariffs regarding federal spending. The Department of Education under Linda McMahon has now cut is announced plans to cut 50% of their staff. They're sending a lot of staff home to work remotely for the time being, for a couple of weeks anyway. And the bleeding and the crying over, yet again, another Achilles heel for something the left is just blisteringly passionate about never ceases to be funny. We're going to talk about that. Radio folks, we'll see you after the commercial break. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast. Randi Weingarten, head of the AFT, the American Federation of Teachers, that's the second largest teachers union in the country behind Becky Pringle, her National Education Association. They're losing their minds because Trump has I'll say justifiably, argued that the Department of Education needs to be shut down, or at least scaled back drastically. Because before the Jimmy Carter administration, there was an Office of Education. And the Office of Education did collect education statistics from around the country, kind of kept a file on how different states were doing, different regions. And that's a good thing, for an office of the president, for him to, look at various things regarding different categories around the country. The Department of Education under Jimmy Carter has done nothing at all. It has not improved literacy. It has not improved math or science performance. It has not improved the general cost relative education expense for American students. It hasn't improved communities. It hasn't actually improved the amount or the quality of care for students with special needs, despite the DOED running around and claiming that they are. It is one of the biggest, bloated, garbage-filled agencies in federal government. The vast majority of the staff, by the way, aren't focused on providing local schools with what they need. They're focused on grant writing for universities that are busy having the little Marxist professors and pro-Hamas students running around on campus. But anywho, I don't want to let this get away. Here's Randi Weingarten telling us that, well, at least she's using her words, she's mad.
Is why so many people are so mad about it, because they're just taking opportunity away from kids that don't have it. So kids of billionaires, they have it. They go to private schools. Everyone else, 90%, go to public schools. Don't take away their opportunity.
So let's stay on the facts.
Sorry.
No.
I love that. They're billionaires' kids, the billionaires. Again, the majority of school choice programs do not target the wealthy. The majority of voucher programs exist for individuals who make below a certain amount a year to go to a school of their choice. That could be a public school, could be in a different district. But why you should force a child to go to inner city Baltimore school districts is so beyond the realm of common sense. And they're going to hold this, they're going to desperately cling to it. There are also leaked teachers union conversations in which they've articulated the reason they're terrified of the Department of Education saying sayonara is because now there won't be as much of a need for public schools, and the money will all go to vouchers and school choice programs. Gee, what an absolute McShame that is. Oh, that would just be horrible if kids were able to go where they were best met, at least as far as their needs are. So we'll be back in a second to talk about Chuck Schumer and Trump today and the 80-20 issues. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on The Daily Signal.
The Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
I'm going to be honest with you guys. I've been looking forward to this all day. So I've gotten a question about this before, and I will try not to belabor the point. My title at the Daily Signal is getting ready to change. It's been an investigative columnist for a while, and I've enjoyed doing a lot of investigative column work. But as the show stuff has grown, again, in part due to the phenomenal work from producers like Allison and Daniel and Lou, and then, of course, the audience, you guys are great. The YouTube chat and the messages that we get after the show, First of all, we read every one of those comments. And number two, we're just thrilled that you guys would take the time out of your day to tune in. But during the day, I go on a lot of network, cable, TV, and radio and kind of chime in, kind of through my analysis. Something that I believe is a masterstroke of this entire administration, what every individual who Trump picked has down pat, no problems, no questions, nothing to the left or right, they've got it ready to go, is leaning in on the 80-20 issues. Whether you're talking about Tulsi Gabbard, whether you're talking about Kristi Noem, whether you're talking about Kash Patel, whether you're talking about Pete Hegseth or Secretary of State Marco Rubio or Vice President J.D. Vance, when it comes to this administration, they know what the general public is looking for. The left has no idea. The left believes that whatever theater majors on some college campus believe socially, that's where the party needs to go. Up to and including electing one of them, David Hogg, the super far to the left young activist, as the vice chair of the DNC. And it has gone so far to the left that the things that the left is now siding with is such a disturbing level of political suicide, it has me wondering if they have evidence that may lead to the arrest of Hillary Clinton. That's how bad this looks. So, first of these would be the Senate Judiciary Democrats and the Senate Democrats in general, who have been losing their mind because, as we talked about earlier on in the show, Tom Homan, who had the wherewithal to follow federal law, and that included arresting and getting ready to deport. There's a temporary injunction from a federal judge. I guarantee you that'll be overturned. But the Mahmoud Khalil individual, who has gone around inciting violence and spreading around not like pro-Palestine stuff, like open, like Hamas logos on flyers. So Homan goes to, again, arrest and deport. And the Senate Judiciary Democrats and guys like Chuck Schumer are coming out and saying, this is terrible. How could, if they're able to arrest non-citizens, they'll arrest citizens next. And a bunch of other really weird stuff regarding what is an 80-20 issue with Americans. And that is in the Middle Eastern situation, siding with Israel over siding with Hamas and the other Iranian terror sponsors. So here is Trump today calling Chuck Schumer an honorary Palestinian.
Blame the Democrats. And Schumer is a Palestinian as far as I'm concerned. You know, he's become a Palestinian. He used to be Jewish. He's not Jewish anymore. He's a Palestinian. Okay.
The media immediately. This is just Trump telling the jokes and the mean tweets. That's going to roll. The media is losing their mind over it, saying, oh, that's terribly anti-Semitic. No, it's not. Nah, that ain't. It isn't. There is a kind of a blended line between the Jewish ethnicity and the Jewish religion. And Chuck Schumer and many other Democrats are, just about as Jewish in faith as a lot of Catholics who were baptized when they were a kid and then never did anything else at all ever regarding the church or the Lord Jesus Christ. So you have a lot of people in American society who are playfully agnostic, and they'll cling to their faith and they'll say, oh, I'm a Christian, oh, I'm a Jew, when it's comfortable for them, but that's really about it. Now, by the way, that's not me saying that. That is a lot of prominent Orthodox Jews who have made that very clear. But I digress. Chuck Schumer and the Senate Democrats running out and siding with people like Rashida Tlaib and Pramila Jayapal over in the House and the pro-Hamas wing of the Democrat Party. Trump understands 80-20 issue. There is still an American that is in the custody of Hamas. No complaints from the Senate Judiciary over about that. The Senate Judiciary Dems, I should say. The second, and one that is also pretty fantastic, is Trump's recognition of the transgender issues in this country just being the most molehill of mountains that the Democrats have. And again, his recognizing this now says something very specific about the electorate and about the DNC.
And they should not, and they're also demeaning women. But who would want these things? And everything's transgender. Everybody transgender, that's all you hear about. Now, that's why we won the election in record numbers. But very importantly, now it is what it is. the Democrats should get with us and come up with good tax policy.
He's correct. He's correct. And this is why when the Democrats come out in front of the country, so you had Chuck Schumer saying, well, we're not going to vote on this continuing resolution because the Republicans didn't even work with the Democrats in the House. By the way, that's not true. Representative Golden from Maine broke with the House Democrats to vote in favor of the continuing resolution with the Republicans. So the whole line that Republicans are going to shut down the government, that ain't working now, because there are 60 votes needed and beating the filibuster before you get this particular bill out of the Senate and to the president's desk. And that has to happen before Friday. And guess what? Republicans have just over 50 seats in the Senate. And that's good. And that's fine. Wonderful. That's not enough. And so it is on Senate Democrats to throw enough votes in the pot to get the continuing resolution passed to fund the government until September, which is what this particular CR does. Have the Democrats talked about this in public? No. What have the Democrats been focused about in public? Not the economy. They yelled about Elon Musk and about Doge. And now you have a bunch of young progressives running around setting Teslas on fire, shooting out windows of Tesla dealerships, setting Tesla charging ports on fire, which is unmistakably an act of domestic terrorism, and the Trump administration is wholeheartedly correct to declare the current attacks on Tesla vehicles and dealerships as domestic terrorism. It's an attack, which is violent, meant to achieve a political aim. That's the definition of terrorism. Number two, what are the Democrats focused on? They've yelled about the trans issues. Whether we're talking about the dude in a dress in Congress, Sarah McBride, or whether we're talking about the LGBTQ plus 2IA, whatever nonsense that the Dems are, bleeding and crying about with the military or the Department of Education or the National Institute of Health, etc. So that they've gone all in on that. The next thing is that Trump is a puppet of Putin. He's going to get us into World War III. Right now, we're seeing that fall apart in real time. So what else do they have? They're yelling about ICE, about Tom Homan. They didn't see that the majority of Hispanic Americans, which is supposed to be, according to the Democrats, the demographic that loathes enforcing illegal immigration policy. No, the majority of Hispanic voters are in favor of Donald Trump pursuing that policy. It's an 80-20 issue. So the Democrats are not only completely hiding themselves from economic policy, because the Democrats have always sucked on economic policy. Every American knows it. All Trump has to do is not be terrible on the economic side, and he probably cleans up midterms. Now you actually have the senator from New Hampshire, what's her name, that's not running for re-election. Shaheen, that's right. Jan Shaheen, the New Hampshire Democrat. Now she's not seeking a run for re-election in 2026. So you've got swing states that are up for grabs. It's going to be a rather interesting time in the midterms. And if the Democrats are doing the Queers for Palestine thing to a T, all right, please, by all means, make your entire party about dudes in dresses and then other nonsense. Well, by the way, speaking of nonsense, just one other thing that I wanted to mention before we're done with the show today. And Allison, I assume you probably agree with this, so feel free to chime in. Southwest Airlines making the decision to no longer check free bags is one of the biggest corporate suicides I think I have seen in a very long time. Do you know what I'm saying? Or have you seen this story?
Oh, I've not only seen it, I am very upset.
So first of all, I am an American Airlines purist. I don't care for Southwest. I flew Southwest back and forth when we went to cover the Maui wildfires, and I hated every second of it. I don't really like the idea of airplane boarding, just letting cattle out to graze. They all rush through the gate, and they all take seats, and they're saving seats like it's, fourth grade recess. I think that's silly. But the one thing they had going for them was that their rates used to be more reasonable. Now they're just as expensive as everybody else. And they flew out of weird airports in very weird routes. But I mean, hey, you had free checked bags. You didn't have to rely on the carry-on and then the suitcase that you prayed American Airlines or Delta would get things, together over. And I don't know what they were expecting, that people didn't like the number of Delta and American airline-related plane accidents over the last couple of months and years, that they would be able to upcharge on the baggage and nobody would notice? No. How much money are they actually saving by charging people for bags? Really? I mean, give me an idea. What do you think that their goal? I mean, I know there was this private equity firm that like made the decision, but we're talking about 80-20 issues here. If you're known for something, why would you toss that into the sacrificial fire at a time when people are unsure about the economy? What do you think, Allison?
Oh, I'm totally with you on that. You want any incentive to keep your customers as happy as possible, especially if you're an airplane. I mean, to your point earlier, they're all falling apart. So at least my bag would be free.
It's like those millennial burger joints that don't give you fries with your burger. And they call them handhelds. You've seen that meme, everyone making fun of the millennial burger joints. And right now, people are looking for a deal. And so then when you announce that you're cutting deals and you make really stupid economic decisions, and then you go, what is all this outrage? I was not expecting that. When you have your head up the corporate boardrooms and you expect that the marketing major who's fresh out of Northwestern is going to know better than basic consumer understanding, you've completely lost the plot. The DEI hires not only need to be kicked out of the equity office, it's time to take a look at that marketing department. All right, we've about wrapped it up for today, folks. We'll be back tomorrow with a lot more. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first on 93 WIBC. Take care.